The independence of the Indian nation and the country is celebrated with great pomp and grandeur today. But it was not always the case, because India was dominated by a colonizer and it had to travel through an entire phase of struggle where it had to overthrow the colonizer, that was the British. Now, the Indian independence that we received was through many a wars, many a struggles in the time of history. And this journey started from the Great Uprising of 1857. And today we will look into the story of this uprising.
जाओ, सबको खबर कर दो, आजादी की जंग शुरू।
मंगल, इस इनकलाब को तुम्हारी जरूरत है।
इस इनकलाब को खून की जरूरत है, उसे मेरा होने दो।
Did you recognize the character that was played by Amir Khan? It was Mangal Pandey. Mangal Pandey was a soldier of the Bengal regiment under the British Army when the Britishers had colonized India. This person rose up in rebellion in 1857 that became a part of the Great Revolt of 1857, which is often known as the First War of Independence. Now, you might question, why is it known as the First War of Independence? That is because this was the first time that Indians had come together to voice their opinions for their freedom and against the colonizers, that was the British. It was V.D. Savarkar who had termed this entire idea of the First War of Independence, because he stated that the entirety of the Indian mass had come together to protest against this domination, this colonization under the British. So, in order to understand this First War of Independence, we will have to realize that this First War of Independence, therefore, acted as a watershed in the British Indian colonizing period. Why? Because this became the point of time, this became the break in which we see the power shifting in the hands of the people, and the people realizing that they have a voice, they have an opinion that could come to the forefront. It was also an eminent event which shook the British grounds to the core. Why? Because the British realized that these masses have power in themselves to rise up in rebellion. Though the revolt of 1857 or the great uprising of 1857 was not the first time people were rising up in rebellion against the British colonizers. In history, historians have also pointed out that there have been several uprisings, that of the Kols or the Santals, that took place even much before the Great Revolt of 1857. As you can see in the picture, this is the picture of the Santhal rebellion of 1855 to 56 that occurred against the domination of the British colonizers itself. But this sort of journey that was taken by the Great Revolt of 1857 changed the face of how exactly the British was to govern India politically, and how exactly the masses became aware of who they were being colonized by. So that is why, the Great Revolt of 1857 is often called as the watershed in British Indian history. Now, in order to know the significance of such an event, we have to go deep down into its causes. For our better understanding and ease of the causes of Revolt of 1857, we have divided it into several pockets. That is political, economic, socio-religious and military. The first cause that we will delve into are a set of political causes that triggered the event of 1857. So we see in the map that the British had primarily started out from Bengal, and then they slowly tried to take over the other territories in India. Now we can clearly see how they are moving from Bengal right to Mysore and then central India and almost most parts of northern India and then the western parts of it as well. So ideally we can understand that the British, by the time they had reached to the point where they took the entire Indian territory under their colonial power, they had to change several stances to gain this political power under them. Now, you have to remember the fact that the British East India Company primarily had come in to trade with India. So how did this exact phase of trade to governance happen? Where did this happen? And what were the primary factors or causes that made these happen? That was essentially the political factors that also gave rise to the revolt of 1857. Now we already know the fact that Lord Dalhousie was the then Governor General of India, and he was the Governor General from 1848 to 1856. Under Lord Dalhousie, the British governance saw the most important expansionist policy. So the British government also saw the most amount of expansion, territorial expansion under Lord Dalhousie. Now, under this expansionist policy, the climax was reached when Lord Dalhousie announced the doctrine of lapse in 1848. So this policy that was introduced by Lord Dalhousie entirely changed how British government was to look at the political ideology of governing India as a colony. So what was exactly the doctrine of lapse? Under this policy, we see that the Indian territories were annexed in the absence of a natural heir. That is basically stating that if any Indian territory, if any region, any kingdom did not have a biological heir who also was a male heir, then that territory would directly be annexed by the British government, because the adopted heir will not be taken into consideration. So we see when the king had an adopted son and not a biological son, as his successor, that territory would directly go to the British government without any other consideration. Now, you can understand the fact that this acted as a major changing factor of how the British colonizers were being seen. Now, we have discussed the fact that these people were primarily traders, and now they are, moving ahead to take that sort of governance and the power of governance of the Indian territories. So people are now understanding that these people are not here to exactly trade with them, rather to govern over them. Now when people realized that this doctrine of lapse was essentially and primarily a political policy, they were enraged, because they understood the window dressing that Lord Dalhousie had done in order to take over these Indian territories. Now the first territory to go under the doctrine of lapse and the British takeover was that of Nagpur. Nagpur was then being ruled by Nana Sahib, who was the adopted son of Peshwa Bajirao II. Now, if you remember, as per the policy, the doctrine of lapse, the adopted son cannot be a legal heir. So we see that the territory of Nana Sahib, the kingdom of Nana Sahib, was taken away. So Nana Sahib was forced to surrender Nagpur to the British under the policy of doctrine of lapse. And we also see that not only was his estates taken away, not only was his kingdom taken away, but he was also deported to a faraway area in Kanpur. Now this not only enraged Nana Sahib but also his subjects. So while in Kanpur, he started to gain popularity, and he also started to vitalize people. So he started to gather people in order to oppose the British and the doctrine of lapse. The second was Jhansi. Now Jhansi was a very important territory, because at that point of time when doctrine of lapse was released, Jhansi was under Rani Lakshmi Bai. Now we have all heard about Rani Lakshmi Bai because of her valor and her courage, the way she opposed the British. Now Rani Lakshmi Bai was acting as a regent for her son Damodar Rao, who was an adopted son. So after the death of Rani Lakshmi Bai's husband, because they did not have a biological heir, Rani Lakshmi Bai had adopted Damodar Rao. But Damodar Rao was a mere child when the father passed away, so Rani Lakshmi Bai had to act as a regent. Now by this time we see doctrine of lapse was passed, and when that happened, entire kingdom of Jhansi was to go under the British government directly. So Jhansi was taken over by British under the policy of doctrine of lapse.
Sahiba, I regret to inform you that the Governor-General is not in a position to recognize your adopted son as the lawful heir to the throne of Jhansi.
ये फैसला किस आधार पर किया गया है?
It is the company's opinion that the Peshwas were the legitimate heirs to the palace of Jhansi. Once they gave it to the company, your family can no longer claim Subsidiary rights.
मेजर एलिस साहब, कंपनी सरकार ने हमारे साथ संधि की थी। आपने राजा की उपाधि भी बख्शी थी। और अब?
That was then, Mr. Moripand. Things are different now.
कंपनी सरकार के साथ मेरे पुरखों ने, मेरे पति ने भी हमेशा दोस्ती के संबंध रखे हैं। समय समय पर कंपनी की सेवा की है। दोस्ती में भी क्या तब से अब बड़ा होता है। संधियां क्या केवल कागज पर लिखे शब्द होते हैं?
Please do not misunderstand our intentions. We are fully conscious of your own interests. You will receive a pension of 5,000 rupees a month. But this is on condition that you relinquish the royal palace of Jhansi to the East India Company.
आप हमें रानी भी कह रहे हैं और धमकी देकर हमारा राज भी छीन रहे हैं। आप जो कर रहे हैं उसे हमारे यहाँ दगाबाजी कहा जाता है। मेरी कंपनी सरकार से अब भी प्रार्थना है, हमारे बेटे को हमारा वारिस मानते हुए उसे झांसी की राजगद्दी का हकदार माना जाए।
You have no cause for complaint. You have our offer of a handsome pension and the city palace.
लेकिन झांसी से हमें बेदखल कर रहे हैं। कह दीजिए आपके लाट साहब से, झांसी की रानी खैरात पर जीना नहीं सीखी है। झांसी हमारी थी, अब भी है। मैं अपनी झांसी नहीं दूंगी, कभी नहीं दूंगी।
Thus we saw in the video how Rani Lakshmi Bai resisted the British colonizers, and she put up a very heavy fight against them. So not only was Jhansi being taken away by the British colonizers, but also the Rani was being given a mere pension. So this enraged Rani Lakshmi Bai, and she stated that she was not going to give up her kingdom. So you can understand how enraged the Rani and the masses were getting against the policies that British colonizers were trying to bring up. So not only were these areas taken under the British rule, but we see that over the course of 8 years, Jaipur, Udaipur, Satara, Sambalpur, these places also are going under the governance of the British by the doctrine of lapse. This was something that the masses could still deal with, but a harder blow was given by the British East India Company, the British government, when Lord Dalhousie stated that all pensions and all titles were to be confiscated of the princess. So as per the policy of doctrine of lapse, we see the titles and pensions of some Indian princess were to be confiscated, which was also another clause of the doctrine of lapse. Now, at that point of time, it was the Mughal Empire that was ruling most of the country, that had a territorial base in India larger than any other regional kingdom. But the Mughal Empire was also in a dilapidated state because it was Bahadur Shah II who was ruling, and he was old enough. Though he was old enough or did not really have enough power to rule the subjects, we have to realize that he was a pan-India structure that gave the subjects a sort of person to look up to. So Bahadur Shah II acted as the epitome of power that they still looked up to, they still revered. So this exemption of titles and pensions was seen as a blow to their king, to their ruler. Now the subjects were enraged with the fact that the titles were being taken away. They were also enraged by the fact when Dalhousie stated that Bahadur Shah was to move out of Red Fort and stay at a nearby palace of Qutub Minar that was given by the British government. So that primarily enraged the people as to how could a British government, a colonizer, come and state and take away the seat of power that belonged to the Mughal Sultan. So we see that Dalhousie announced in 1849 that Bahadur Shah wouldn't be allowed to stay in the Red Fort anymore, and he also announced that the title of the Mughal emperor would be abolished after the death of Bahadur Shah II. So you can understand how this seat of power was constantly being attacked on some ground or the other, so that the British government could ultimately take away that power and start governing by themselves. Now, it was not just the doctrine of lapse that sort of ideally wanted to change the power structure. One of the other major policies that came out during that time, that was primarily to get hold of the regional kingdoms, essentially the princely states, was that of the introduction of subsidiary alliance in 1798. Now, the subsidiary alliance was introduced by Lord Wellesley. What exactly were the clauses of the subsidiary alliance? First, it stated that the regional king or the Nawab who signed the alliance had to give the virtual administrative control of his kingdom to the British. So, exactly what would happen is that the king would become a puppet ruler, and the essential powers of administration, of governance of those regional kingdoms, of those princely states, would directly go into the hands of the British government. Now, not only was there a main clause of the subsidiary alliance, we see that there were certain terms that the subsidiary alliance had that the person who was signing it had to follow. So, what were those? First term was that the ruler had to dissolve his own army. So, the ruler, the king, could not keep a particular army that would protect him. Why so? Because of the basic reason that this army, being the native army, could of course rise up in rebellion against the colonizers. So the colonizers did not, you see, want to keep an ounce of faith on the army of the king. Second, that the king would have to pay a subsidy for the maintenance of the British forces in his territory. Now, if these territories are going under the British government, they will have to be protected somehow or the other. Now, when the army of the king is being disposed of, there has to be some army that would protect the territory, and it would of course be the British army, because the British would want to keep it under the watch of their people. Now, who would have to pay these British people, these British soldiers? It would be the king. So the king was given the responsibility of paying a subsidy, so paying an allowance to these people, to these armies that would ideally protect the territory for the British. But the payment, the subsidy would come from the native ruler. Third was, they couldn't make an ally or wage a war without permission of the British. So the main point of the subsidiary alliance, you see, was that there were no real powers that the native king had, that the native ruler had. It was always the British government that would, gain the higher pedestal after signing of the subsidiary alliance. So with this fact that the native ruler did not even have a say of who they could wage war with or who they could form a peace treaty with. It was to be with the permission of the British government. And the last one is that the British promised to protect the kingdom from internal revolt or foreign attack. Now, of course, when there is no power in the hands of the native ruler, we can understand that, the native ruler did not have any sort of power at his disposal to even protect the territory and neither the people. So what did the Britishers do? The British colonizers stated that they will take the responsibility of the territory, the masses. So they primarily promised that they would protect the territory from any internal revolt and also from any foreign attack. But in reality, the sense was that they will protect the territory because the entire territory belongs to them. That kingdom belongs to them. So, of course, they would not want any internal rivalries arising, any rebellions arising. So, the way it was presented was a little different. But the reality of the political clauses was something else that the Britishers did not write down on paper. So can you tell me who introduced the subsidiary alliance? Was it Lord Dalhousie, Lord Hardinge, Lord Minto, or Lord Wellesley? The correct answer will be Lord Wellesley. Now the first kingdom to sign this subsidiary alliance was that of Hyderabad. So we see that Nizam Ali Khan, who was the Nizam of Hyderabad, signed this treaty, signed the subsidiary alliance, and Hyderabad was the first place which was taken in 1798. So we see that the Britishers take the administrative hold of Hyderabad after the signing by the Nizam. Now, it is to be noted that it was not always up to the rulers to choose if they could or could not sign. So we were discussing about the fact that not everything was written on paper, not everything was discussed on paper. So there was a lot of window dressing with these political causes that slowly and steadily we come to realize when we go in depth with the causes, the political causes that created the revolt. So one of the major causes was that of the annexation of Awadh. Now what was the story behind it? The Nawab of Awadh, Wajid Ali Shah, did not primarily want to sign the subsidiary alliance. He agreed to signing the subsidiary alliance only with one condition, that the British would not come in and annex Awadh. But after Wajid Ali Shah gave his signatures in the subsidiary alliance, we see that Awadh was annexed in 1856, and so that the Nawab cannot form any sort of rebellion against the British, he was deported to Bengal. So you see, he was deported to Bengal, and the annexation happened not because of the subsidiary alliance, but because something that Lord Dalhousie stated as a political reason. So he stated that the people under the Nawab were being taxed more and were not being governed properly. So ideally that the Nawab was not being able to render his duties. Lord Dalhousie said that for the better governance of the people, it is important that the British government takes power away from Wajid Ali Shah and they start governing directly. So it is very important to realize that ultimately British did showcase, the power of coercion to take hold of Awadh, which became a sort of final blow to this uprising, this resentment that people had towards their colonizers. Thus, we understand that after Awadh was taken by coercion, was taken by force, people started to realize the hidden motives that Britishers had towards these, policies that they were bringing up. So this created a resentment amongst the people, because it was not only that, the kings and the native rulers and the Mughal emperor was, being insulted or disrespected, or their estates were being taken away. It was also the common people that were being exploited. It was also the talukdars and the feudal lords whose power was being taken away by the British, because the British colonizers now wanted to rule directly. They wanted to, take up the charge of the governance, of the political governance. So this angered the people because of the fact that these people were foreigners and now they are coming in and taking the territory in its entirety and changing the way the territory is governed, as well as, of course, disrespecting their native rulers, their native emperors, who these masses looked up to. So you can understand how angry the people must have been. So let's quickly recapitulate the political causes. First was the aggressive expansionist policies of the British. At this point of time, various regional identities were gaining a threshold over the political scene in India. The British were quick to come up with various political policies that crushed their power and brought them under the governance of the British. So we see various parts of Eastern India, Western India, as well as Deccan go under the governance of the British. Next was the doctrine of lapse under Lord Dalhousie. So Lord Dalhousie essentially created a policy by which the kingdoms which did not have a male biological heir, those kingdoms would directly go to the British, under the British government, and the British would have all political powers regarding it. Third was the subsidiary alliance by Lord Wellesley, where the king, the native ruler, would only remain a puppet ruler and would not have any power regarding the territory, regarding the estate. The final blow was the annexation of Awadh, which showcased the real motives behind the policies that the Britishers were bringing on the forefront, and also the idea of how and exactly why they were taking these territories from the native rulers. So thus, we have looked into detail the exact political causes that might have caused the uprising of 1857, which came to be known as the First War of Independence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.